Hey everybody, today I'm going to be making this page in my Dilutions art journal. I've already adjusted my page and I'm placing a Dina Wakley Media woman chipboard and spraying water over the top of it and then removing the chipboard. I'm using this as a mask, so as you can see when I start placing down the ColorSparx watercolor powders, these powders are going to react with the water to create watercolors. But because that mask of the chipboard was there, you can see the complete silhouette of the woman. And this is going to allow me to play with these powders and create a silhouette within the background. So now I'm going in with a wet brush. And because there were little bits of powder where I applied this silhouette, I'm able to just activate a little bit of it and get a very light color field. And if it gets too dark, I can just clean my brush off onto my palette and continue working so that I can keep this very, very light. And now with that same wet brush, I'm going to begin activating the rest of the powder in the background. And you can see because a lot more powder was applied in the background, this is a much deeper, richer color. I'm taking care as I'm going around the silhouette that I created with that chipboard that I'm not getting and touching the actual edge. You can see there's a little bit of a white outline around that, and that's because I'm working with all wet. And if I hit the inside of that masking area, it's going to bleed into it. So I'm keeping a little bit of a barrier so that these colors remain very dark and very light. I'm only using one of the colors that comes in the ColorSparx Berry Punch set, and this is the color of fuchsia. And so you can see now I've applied it on half of my page, and then I'm using a baby wipe to blend out to the rest of the page, the right half of it, so that I get very light color. And then I'm going in with a wet brush and just putting some extra water so that as I tip my page, this is going to move and run. And this is a little bit of an experiment to see how these colors are going to react with being very diluted versus being very saturated and dark. After letting everything dry, I decided I didn't like those drip marks. And so one of the cool things about this product is it's watercolors, so you can change and alter it even after it's dry. So I simply used my baby wipe and wiped up those drips in the center of my page. And now I'm going to try again by dragging the color with a wet brush from the left side to the right side to get more of a gradient and blend here. So one cool thing, again, because these are watercolors, they will continue to react. So that's something to consider when you're designing your project. If you're going to use them on an item such as a handmade card or a home decor piece, you may want to use a permanent fixative or sealer after it's 100% dry. I don't worry about it in my art journal as these are for my personal use and I just leave them as is. After I allow this to dry once again, I'm much happier with this blend from left to right, so I can start working on my next layers. So because these products are water reactive, I'm blocking out the areas where I don't want the water to go, and then I'm spraying through a stencil, and you can start to see those colors reacting right away. But now I can take another color of the powder and gently squeeze over the top of it, and you're going to see that the dyes are going to react with the water and not anywhere else. So this is another way that you can get prints with stencils and these ColorSparx powders. So I'm doing the exact same thing again, just blocking off the areas around my stencil and then spraying water once again. And when I did the first time to the second time, I did let it dry in between. So I'm not placing this paper towel over the top of wet powders. It is dry under there. I'm going to remove all the paper towels once again and do these exact same steps until I have the coverage everywhere that I want it. And then I'm going to let this dry 100% and then I can go back and remove the extra powders. So you can see I have the stenciling everywhere that I want it, and I've let this dry 100%, so there's zero moisture. And I'm using a dry brush to now just brush away the extra powders off the top of my stenciling. This needs to be 100% dry or you will smudge your stencils. Now I'm ready to place down some gesso. Now I'm using this gesso on a stamping block and then spreading it out with my palette knife, and then I'm going to use this as a stamp. Now the reason why I'm doing this is, once again, as you've seen, these powders are extremely reactive, so if I had to brush this on with a brush right away, I would have just smudged all of my painting and all of my gesso would have become very, very dark red. So by doing it this way, I'm able to kind of put it down where I want and then very gently brush it out or smooth it out with my palette knife and then allow this to dry. Now it is reacting some of the powders, but it's much less than it would have if I had started brushing it on with a paintbrush. So after letting the first layer dry, I'm going in once again with more gesso and layering over the top of that first gesso layer. And I'm going to do this to kind of build up the color and make it much lighter. I want this to eventually be white, so I'm going to have to place several layers of this to build up that color and get it above the water reactive products. And while the white paint is drying, I can mix up some black paint with some water to get it very liquidy. You could also just use liquid acrylic paint, whichever you have. And I'm using some paper towel to once again block off the areas that I don't want any of this black splatter to be. And then I'm just going to scoop up this watery paint with my palette knife and start shaking it onto my page to create drips and splatters. You could also use a Tim Holtz Distress splatter brush, or you could do it this way. You'll get different size drops depending which tool you choose to use. So experiment and try different things. I'm happy with this, so I'm going to lift those 2 pieces of paper towel out of the way and leave this to dry. And while it's drying, I'm grabbing another piece from the Dina Wakley Media Woman's Chipboard set. This is a different silhouette than what I originally used in my first layer. And I'm just going to cover the entire piece with black gesso. And I'm using my finger just because I don't want there to be any brush strokes or texture. I want it to be flat. So I'm using my finger to just brush it out completely smooth. And then I will set this aside to dry. In case I forgot to mention it before, the original chipboard piece that I used and sprayed water over the top of it, if you let that dry 100%, you could use that again in another project. So now I'm going in with my third layer of white paint, and you can see this one is really, because there's so many layers of gesso, this one is actually becoming completely white. So I'm just painting this on with the brush, and then when it is 100% where I want it to be, I'm just going to use my finger to smooth out the edges a little bit. And some of this will remain white, some of it will become a little bit pink, and that's okay. I picked this stain from the Dress My Craft Quotes 1 transfer sheet, and I cut it out of the sheet, and then I'm cutting away any of the extra transfer that is around the quote, and then I can place it down on my page. If you don't want to take time to cut away all of the extra around the quote, it will transfer clear, so you do not have to do this, but that is just my preferred method to remove the extra transfer so there isn't extra to transfer. I like things to be just really clean and precise. So after I've trimmed that all away with my scissors, I can peel off the top protective layer and then place it down. And I'm also bringing in my painted chipboard piece so that I can make sure that I like the placement and how everything is going to look. And when I'm happy with it, I'm just going to press down with my hands to begin that transfer and seal it down. After I've pressed it into place, I can begin removing that backing paper with a wet sponge. Now you could use a makeup sponge or a kitchen sponge. After you've used it for crafting, don't bring it back into your home for personal use. Keep it as a crafting tool. And I'm just carefully going around all of the edges of this transfer because this is water reactive product on the background. I don't want there to be water in random places, so I'm taking care to only apply water on the back of the transfer. And then gently lift it up and remove it. Now in this case, it ripped, but that's okay because I can just go to the edge again and pick up the rest of it and peel off the second portion of the transfer backing. And now this is in place. To protect the transfer, it's suggested that you use a clear sealer or clear gesso to protect that and prevent it from being lifted or scratched later on. So I'm just using a layer of Dina Wakley Media gel medium and carefully applying it with my Finnabar silicone brush. Once again, I don't want to activate any of the background, so I'm just carefully placing it only on top of the transfer and then smoothing that out. And the very last thing we need to do is to glue down our painted chipboard shape. I'm using Distress Collage Medium and placing it over the entire back of the chipboard piece with my finger. You could, of course, use a paintbrush or palette knife to put on this, but I just find it's fast with my finger and I'm able to get into all the details of the chipboard and not have the glue be everywhere. And after I'm happy with the coverage on the back, I'm just going to carefully place down the chipboard piece onto my page. Now again, because this background is water reactive, once you place it down, you don't want to move it around a bunch. You want to just place it down and be happy with it, press it in place, and then leave this alone to dry. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you got ideas and are inspired to create your very own art journal page. If so, I would love to see them, so tag us on social media using hashtag ArtJournalJunction. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any mixed media projects or art journaling pages in the future.